So hey anime fans. The series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Star Wars. So let's start the series. Within the walls of a man-made cave, two adults stood against a teenager. The first adult was a woman with short blue hair and a bob cut who was in her early 30s. Her eyebrow, various ear piercings, and snakebite were among the numerous facial piercings. She had on a full-length trench coat with white outlines of red clouds and a pure black tone. Perched in a mechanical device that resembled a gigantic set of 6 robotic legs was the second adult. The machine resembled a throne in construction, and the guy sitting on it appeared to be in his hundreds, if not older. But everyone there knew it was untrue, because the man simply had a constant chakra exhaustion. His long white hair hung loose and tattered around his shoulders. His eyes seemed to carry the secrets of the cosmos, and he sat bare-chested with several rods sticking out of his chest. It just so happens that the story's most significant element is the last of the three. He is only 17 years old and currently holds the Kyuubi, a 9-tailed demonic fox composed of pure energy and rage-filled fury, the most dangerous monster in the world. At the moment, the boy was dressed in blue ninja sandals and black and orange pants with rectangular patterns running up the legs. His eyes showed sympathy and pity for his fellow human being, and his golden hair throbbed with the boy's feelings. With anger visible in his eyes, the youthful, adolescent Naruto gave Nagato a menacing gaze. With well-controlled rage, he thundered, "I've heard everything you had to say, Nagato. And your words mean nothing to me." His voice echoed off the paper walls. The shout caused Nagato's eyes to widen a little, and he moved slightly forward in his chair. He asked, pausing to think about the circumstances. He admitted, "I'm too low on chakra to do anything at this point," not realizing that his views were reflecting those of his female partner. In order to put herself between Naruto and Nagato, the blue-haired woman moved. She started off by saying, "Listen here, brat," in a hateful tone. "If you think I'm just going to sit here and let you harm the only man in the world I care about without lifting a finger, you've got another thing coming," she challenged, standing aggressively with one foot sliding forward and one hand slightly higher than the other, shifting the sand beneath her feet. Without a prelude, Naruto's eyes changed, the iris turning from a rounded shape to long black bars resembling a toad's. His gaze hardened as he took in the woman's figure. "If you really want to get involved, I guess I can kick your butt too," he said. In an attempt to stop the two, Nagato held up a hand and coughed violently, causing some blood to spill from the simple motion. "Please, no more violence." For a private eternity, the young woman and the blonde boy were silent, but at some invisible signal, they finally relaxed and came to a draw. Conan begged, "Nagato, you're bleeding. Let me tend to you," but was dismissed with a simple head shake. Knowing the end was nigh, she started to say, "Nah dash," but then stopped herself and hung her head. The man looked at Naruto and slowly lowered the hand that was still up. "Before I die, I have to do something for you. Naruto, become the person of legend and bring peace to this world. Be the student Jiraiya-sensei always knew he'd have." Jedi Assassin. The first arc of Huts and Ninjas. At some point in time, Naruto awakened with a jolt, his face burning from the heat of the twin stars. He felt a weight pressing very painfully against his chest and the sense of cool sand at his back. His voice was scratchy, as if he had gone without drink for ages. "Wadash? 2 sons," he said feebly. When the blond lad felt every muscle in his body reject the simple act, he raised his hand to wipe his incredulous eyes. An unbelieving, "What the heck happened?" he asked. Before hearing a grunt and a dull thud, Naruto managed to muster the energy necessary to press the weight off of him by swallowing forcefully against the bulge in his throat and making a ram symbol with each hand. This caused a surge of chakra to go through his system. He muttered to himself, "Whatever that was, it sure was soft and hairy." as he was still unable to turn or stand up. An all too familiar voice said, "You'd better apologize before I regain motor controls, or I'm gonna kill you, brat dash." Though it was a mood matter, he tried to stretch his senses by asking, "Who's there? Bachan?" he said incoherently. The blue-haired Conan's angry screech voice said, "Who the hell were you calling an old woman, brat?" She threatened. "That's it, I'm gonna stab you right now." Naruto tightly closed his eyes and waited for the pain to start, only to experience no such feelings. Naruto teased, "Hey, you sure do talk big. Too bad you can't walk the walk." As her body persisted in resisting her commands, Conan gave a frustrated grunt. When her gaze eventually followed the sky, she questioned, "Is it just me, or are there two suns?" With a childlike tone, Naruto inquired doubtfully, "You seen it too? I thought I just hit my head too hard." "Hey!" he exclaimed abruptly right before the end. Upon hearing the remarks, Conan's focus immediately shifted to the blonde. "Where's Nagato?" Quietness. Time-lapse photos with Conan and Naruto. After being immobilized for several hours, the two were eventually able to move, with Naruto recuperating more quickly than his kunoichi counterpart. The blonde quickly stood up and kicked his feet, and stretched his arms to feel the somewhat greater gravity, and to express his happiness at not being confined to the earth. He was so engrossed in his small celebration that he was unaware of the errant air. With a gleeful yell, "Yada! I can finally move again!" he sprang as high as his legs would carry him and punched a fist into the air. Conan, who was currently only able to support herself while lying on the ground, took a good look. To attract the blonde's attention, Conan coughed into her hand while sporting a pair of rosy cheeks. "Yahoo yahahaha!" is what an overly excited Naruto exclaimed while dancing in the desert dunes. Naruto leaned over and slapped his butt at her, taunting, "There's no way you're going to stab me now, crazy old lady." Naruto froze still while he was in this posture, and Conan passed out, bleeding profusely. His eyes became slitted. He gave the spot where his pants should be a little rub. Slowly, the blonde came to her senses. He let out an unbelieving cry that made the sand quake and caused numerous desert critters to scramble away. "I am naked!" Within the city. Mos Eisley City. Standing in front of a man who should have been blind was a young woman who was completely pregnant with a child. Even though his eyes were not in his sockets, he gazed straight at the young woman, his face scarred by the harsh rays of a life spent in a different world on a planet that was even harsher and more cruel than Tatooine. The young woman carefully reached for the man's hand and was given permission to grasp it, but the man's face did not soften in the slightest. The loved phrase made her want to touch her belly. "Please tell me your name at least. This past year I've known you and even loved you," she said. "Can I at least afford your name?" The bulk of Tatooine's population, even the Hutts, fled while the man was present out of dread that his prophecies would be directed at them. The guy's voice was as clear as dried leaves, and he talked in a smooth manner that shook everyone who listened to him right down to their core. The man yelled, "This is not my time. Nor is it my home, woman!" Many would have labeled him insane if he hadn't traveled between stars, and they might have labeled him deranged if all of his statements hadn't come true. "My soul longs for Arrakis. The desert freeman in me sings to live by the crysknife, to ride the great worms, and these old bones of mine long to take the long desert walk." As she attempted to cup the man's face in a loving embrace, tears welled up in her eyes. "Be dash." He grasped the woman's hands and said, "No!" with firmness. The elderly guy with the sunbaked face and no eyes suddenly paused and stared into the desert. "Even if you've loved me, my heart will always and forever belong to my dearly departed Cheney. If it weren't for the necessity of this timeline, I would not have even touched you dash." He made a definitive remark. No, this is wrong. They should not be here. The residents of the nearby town found themselves encircling the elderly idiot whose prophecies consistently came true, drawn to the old man of the desert like moths to a flame. Hear me, oh you stupid, stupid people! The sand cries out for a savior from the fat slugs you call huts. A savior is in the belly of this woman, and no one and no hut can stop his birth, he exclaimed. Hovering on platforms, 3 huts, Jabba, Ogawa, and Gardella observed from above. Ogawa demanded, Translate to hut, there must be a way to get rid of this guy. In contrast to most other huts, Ogawa dressed like a woman, replete with pink makeup and lipstick, artificial eyelashes, and a crimson-red racing stripe down its back. After exchanging angry looks, Jabba and Gardella pushed the Femish hut off the platform and onto the ground. Before the two hovered away, Jabba challenged, Translate to hut, you get down there and do something, Ogawa, and let the hut plummet to her destiny. As Naruto caught the enormous screaming slug and placed it securely on the ground, a flash of orange, black, and yellow danced into the distance just before the shrieking bag of goo hit the ground. He thought he was talking to a pet when he said, Hey, are you okay? The crowd divided and gave him a brief, glaring look before scattering, which was a major surprise. He queried the suddenly deserted street. What would I do? Without ever noticing the blind man observing him. Conan, on the other hand, took note and made a number of hand gestures before hurling a shuriken of paper at the man. However, the man stepped past each of them with the bare minimum of moves in a startlingly quick manner. The man walked quickly, his fingers suddenly around her throat, and time seemed to bend about him. With authority, he said, Why are you here? You play a more significant role elsewhere, Conan of Amagakure. The Angel of Rain Country may have shuddered at the guy's determined voice if she hadn't lived much of her life next to a man who had been exalted to godhood. As it was, Conan was forced to speak, and even after all of her training, the strange genjusta of the man's voice was overwhelming her body's defenses. I don't know, she said, fumbling under the man's hold. The man's other hand appeared out of nowhere, snatching the kunai and throwing it into the air as his palms smacked Naruto in the solar plexus, sending the youngster falling end over end. In a split second, Naruto was at the man's side, a kunai almost burying itself in the elder's abdomen. The man said, Stand down, and Naruto was forced to kneel as his voice seemed to reverberate throughout the room. Naruto's shocked expression conveyed the treachery of his body. In a fit of wrath, he bit his lip till blood came out and said, Damn it! Move body! Obey me, not that guy! But unlike any other genjutsu, it was painless for him to remove. Conan writhed in the old man's hands as he turned his blind eyes to the blue-haired woman. Never acknowledging that she was afraid for her life, she questioned, What are you? Are you a god too, like Nagato? The sound of glass fragments falling down a hill was the old man's loud laugh. With an awe-inspiring voice, he yelled, A god? Not in the slightest! There is no god in this world. No divine originator to fix all the problems we create. Open your eyes, you fool! Through sheer effort, Naruto forced his legs to allow him to stand while gritting his teeth so tightly that his gums started to bleed. With chakra coursing through his body, Naruto challenged, Arrrrrrggggg. Damn you! You think you can just do whatever you want to do, to anyone that you want, and you can get away with it. Don't you? Slowly, his power returned. The man without eyes raised his brows in mild astonishment. He said, Well, you are quite special after all, Naruto Uzumaki. As he let go of Conan and allowed the bluinet to drop to the ground without breaking any bones. The man assigned to the kunoichi said, Conan, train Naruto the right way. Those eyes of his are quite special. Before turning away from the two. In a split second, a sandstorm devastated the nearby region, spanning an entire city block. The sorrowful and the previous man vanished in less than 3 minutes, leaving Shmi, Naruto, Konan, and Ogawa the hut to shudder at their near-death experience. When Ogawa noticed Naruto and his peculiar eyes, he was the first to take action. As a series of grunting warbles came out of her mouth, Ogawa screamed, "Translate to hut, what has happened to your eyes?" Naruto's eyes were bewildered as he turned to see Konan. He said to Konan, "I wonder what this pet slug horse thing is trying to tell me." Konan rolled her eyes and crossed her arms, huffing. "Why are you asking me? I don't speak animal languages, idiot!" she screamed. She shuddered inside when she saw how significantly Naruto's eyes had changed. His sclera, which had previously been a typical white, was now purple with silver irises that had 6 purple rings arranged in descending order. She swore at the sky. "Nagato, you idiot, you gave him your eyes?" Naruto shrugged and came to a realization. He had lost his clothes somewhere in the sandstorm. "Once more!" he cried out. "EK! I'm naked!" Just before Konan burst out laughing. He objected. "Hey! It's not funny!" Shmi blushed at the naked young blonde from a distance in her corner. Despite being a few years younger than her, he was unquestionably mature. She did notice, after all. Ogawa yelled, "Translate to hut, you there, slave girl!" to get Shmi's attention. Shmi fled to the front of the hut and collapsed to her face, as any slave who respected her master would. "Yes, Ogawa?" she said, her face buried in the floor. Naruto made a few clones with his hands crossed in a T shape, and they changed into a hide pants, a t-shirt, a jacket, and underwear that exactly matched what he had been wearing previously. He put them on and saw that the young woman appeared to idolize the slug as it spoke to her in a very wet-sounding voice. With his eyes contracted to slits, Naruto grumbled, "Now that's just weird." Konan gave the scene a stupid nod. Shmi took a sharp sniff of her lover's scent while holding the letter to her bosom. As she reflected on all the changes that had occurred over the years, stars danced joyfully in her eyes. She had been promoted to the position of official interpreter and instructor to the hut's guards after having been a slave owned by Wado, a merchant in discarded parts and tools. Even more incredible than the promotion itself was the fact that she was bestowed with a real title after marrying the love of her life. In other places, Naruto let out a low growl of annoyance. When he collapsed onto his back, he exclaimed, "Damn it! I just can't get it!" The young man's appearance revealed that he was getting close to 20 years old. Although this world's heat and sun were severe, the blonde's greatest advantage was the demon imprisoned inside his belly, which helped him heal so quickly that he never even got tanned. Even while his whisker lines were still present, his face features were beginning to shed the baby fat he had as a toddler. Naruto gasped a little and concentrated on his own chest's gradual rise and fall. Naruto closed his eyes and begged, "Pervy Sage, I could use some serious help if you're still out there looking out for me." He lay still, dead to the world around him, the heat of the Tatooine suns burning on his flesh. A young voice yelled, "Naruto?" The voice was that of a woman I knew. But when she got closer, it became clear that her features were unlike any human's. Her skin was blue, and she was wearing a see-through blouse and flimsy, billowing leggings, so the blonde and anyone else looking at her didn't need to use their imagination. In between her breasts, her long, blue-brain tentacles were entwined around one another, framing her face. Naruto craned his neck and opened one eye to gaze at the young Twi'lek woman, who was easily 5 years his senior. The woman had fallen in love with him, but since she was Jabba's property, and exhibited in the most disparaging ways to elicit a response from the blonde, anything more than a friendly exchange was forbidden. "Hey Kendai," said Naruto. When he spoke out loud for the first time, he saw that his pitch had increased significantly. She held up his head and placed it in her lap, reprimanding him. "What are you doing out here in the desert? Do you want to die of heat exhaustion?" The chilly skin-to-skin contact made Nerdu coo affectionately. Nerdu tried his best to ignore the blonde's reaction to the smooth, tempting give of her flesh. When his acute senses detected the aroma clinging to her person, it didn't help. "Don't worry about me, Kendai. I'll be fine no matter what this planet throws at me," he said. As Kendai gradually started caressing the blonde's face, her eyes softened a little. As her fingertips followed the lines of Nerda's whiskers, she nearly let out a girlish shriek when she heard him start to purr. But there were far too few of them, and she didn't want the moment to pass, so she sat silently and listened to the rhythmic sounds. But as the huts left the big quartz walls, the private moment came to an end. In his rich baritone voice, Jabba yelled, "Translate to hut, Kendai! It is time to leave, useless woman!" Nerdu dropped his head to the sand as Kendai bent her head and hurried away. She instantly felt bad about it, but she never gave it a second thought because she knew better than to look anywhere but at her master. "As you command, my lord." Hovering on a floating platform, with Kendai at his feet and Django fed at his side, Jabba could be heard laughing. All the other huts, with the exception of Ogawa, laughed when he quipped, "Translate to hut, what a useless whelp! One day I'll feed him to my sarlacc. Then again he may cause indigestion." Nerda's body shook as he gave a deep growl, his eyes changing from multi-ring to red-slitted. A voice spoke softly as a hand placed itself lightly on the boy's shoulder. "Translate to hut, you know better than to allow them to get under your skin. Besides, the time will come soon, young one." Nerda gave a nod and gradually released his rage. Nerda yelled angrily, Yeah. I still say you should let me kill the fat bastards." The two were taken aback by the quiet ringing of laughter. Upon turning, both spectators saw Conan laughing into an Akatsuki sleeve. "Seriously, Nerdu? How long do you intend to play the role of a lackey? By now, Nagato would be running this whole world and on the way to running the Republic," Conan said with a look of desire in her eyes. Nerdu kicked at the mud and sneered. "I don't want to force people into servitude. And ruling a planet is not exactly my style," said Nerdu. Conan gave an eye roll. "Oh? And who was it that always says I'm gonna be the headmaster one day?" she mockingly said in a voice that was both absurdly manly and almost foolish. Nerda's gaze grew strained. He yelled, "That's a low blow, and you know it, old woman," while pointing the finger accusingly at her. Unexpectedly, Conan slipped to paper and started using paper shuriken to assault Nerda. She bellowed, "Who's an old woman, brat?" despite the fact that no one was there to say anything. Nerdu was forced to race across the desert while thrashing his arms and avoiding hundreds of paper shurikens, almost fatal blows. He repeatedly yelled, Wait," while Conan persisted in pursuing him. He said, "I'm sorry," but was pricked in the butt by a kunai, which made him run even faster. Later on in the evening, plotting in the dark were Jabba, Gardella, Jango Fett, and a man wearing an all-encompassing cloak. Gardella declared, his entire body trembling with anger. "Translate to hut, that human with the strange eyes is a serious problem. Translate to hut. He's stopped over 24 assassination attempts and even managed to capture one of my best hit men. This is an outrage." The sound of Jabba's laughter was like water splashing in a washing machine. "Translate to hut. If you had any halfway decent assassins, like my Django, you might have succeeded in getting rid of the human boy," he mused. Gardella trembled, the lump of green flesh briefly appearing to turn liquid. The elder of the two huts demanded, "Translate to hut. If your Django is so great, why haven't you sent him to get rid of that boy and Ogawa?" When the man in the cloak realized that the talk was about to finish, he spoke, and even Django was a little uneasy about the sound, which sent chills down the hut's spines. "It would seem that we can come to an agreement. You need that boy gone. For the right price, I can be tempted to assure you of his removal and the hut, Ogawa. Alongside Konan and Naruto. Come on, Naruto! It's been 3 years and you still can't use your eyes! Konan yelled. While the youngster had gained overall in chakra control, strength, stamina, his library of self-invented and learned jutsu was numbering in the hundreds and his elemental manipulation was at a level rivaling a wind god. His Rinnegan eyes, however, had not yet been used. His clones didn't have the eyes, he couldn't push or pull, and he wasn't able to summon sand on a desert planet. He tried, but not even the toads would show up. With a low growl, Naruto produced the ram's seal, summoning 5 Gamabuntas with as much chakra as he could before slamming his palm to the earth. Summoning technique, outer path! He screamed. The ground shook and trembled a little for a moment. Both Naruto and Konan's eyes expanded with anticipation. At that moment, a sarlacc was seen rising from the ground some distance away and then digging a new hole to wait in. Pointing to Konan, he said, "Damn it! What am I doing wrong? You're supposed to be teaching me." In defense, Konan held up her hands. "Expecting me to hold your hand and walk you through it is pretty dumb, Naruto. Besides, I don't know how to use any of Nagato's jutsu. It's like you being able to train a Uchiha in his Sharingan because your traitor friend had the same eyes." Konan blushed covertly as Naruto scratched at a single whisker, his eyes squinting shut. I don't get it. I thought you two grew up together and taught each other everything?" Konan gave a headshake. "Just leave it for today, Naruto. Nagato wasn't able to use any real techniques till our brother died. Then it was unlocked. Since you don't have any loved ones like that here, I guess it doesn't matter." Konan responded by ignoring the expression Naruto had given her. Naruto said as he left, "All right, I'm going to meditate in the desert. Perhaps I can figure out a way to prolong the amount of time I can use my sage mode." After giving a nod, Konan scattered into paper and sailed off to a secret location she often visited. Above the planet Tatooine in space. A battle cruiser with droids on board was hovering in Tatooine's outer orbit. While our 2 units conducted repairs and upheld the ship's integrity, a number of gunner droids paced around the ship. One of the combat droids was alerted by a sudden flurry of bells, whistles, and clicks. "Roger, Roger. Preparing army for deployment." Before the gunner dashed down the corridor for a drop ship, more digital beeps and whistles could be heard. All the droids turned to watch as a deafening klaxon came to life. The helmsman's voice was monotone and robotic. "All hands prepare for immediate departure. All hands prepare for immediate departure." At first glance, Naruto was sat in a lotus stance within the chambers of Ogawa, as the effeminate hut was getting makeup applied. 3 of Naruto's clones were delaying all distractions. The third was to listen to the slug ruler's tirades, while the first 2 served as sentries. Ogawa's passion of conversation was astounding. Therefore, Naruto was in his sage mode at the moment, with slightly denser skin growing around his body and crimson pigment encircling his closed eyelids. Something strange was happening this time. There was a peculiar energy that he could see and nearly feel. It was so similar to sage energy, yet it was a hair's breadth different. He had never thought of leaving Tatooine in all his years there, and he had no desire to find out what was happening outside Ogawa's domain. As a result, he had never asked anything more than the arbitrary question of who Jedi are. Had the blonde asked, he might have learnt about the Force and gone so much further in his meditations. Nevertheless, things were what they are now. Nevertheless, he was taken aback when he sensed a lack of presence, which is typically indicative of spacecraft or droids congregating close to Ogawa's council room. "Ogawa! Get down now!" he yelled, emerging from his reverie and immediately moving the massive slug-like thing. As the 4 clones surrounded the hut and redirected the blasts with Rasengan in hand, Nurta saw as the plasma from the pulse weapon tore through the chamber's walls and floor, mutilating everything inside except for him and Ogawa. Ogawa was furious, terrified for its life, but furious above all. The thunderous words, "Translate to Hut, who dares to attack me in my chambers? Show yourselves, cowards!" caused a noticeable hush. As the four Nurta gripped twin sets of Rasengan, Nurta looked to the left and right, listening to the continuous sounds of air moving. He admonished the Hut. "Ogawa, please be quiet. I can't hear anything yet." And the Hut fell silent. "We've got to get you out of here. Who knows how many droids there are?" The Hut gave a nod and awaited Nurta's orders. "Surrender, Ogawa the Hut. This is an order declared by the Republic. You, your assets, and all of your property are being confiscated until you are found guilty or innocent, or 300 counts of illegal trades, embargoing, and multiple accounts of suspicion of assassination," came the voice of a gunner droid. Nurta knitted his brows. "Wait, what? That doesn't make sense. The Republic doesn't monitor nor enter this space. It's out of your jurisdiction," replied Nurta. The blond young man said. "By an order set into place, agreed and signed by 2 Hut representatives, the Hut space is now a part of the coalition of planets. Ogawa is the only Hut not to agree to the terms and thus is under arrest." He did not know if the response was from the same machine. Nurta clenched his jaw and turned to face Ogawa. Looking slightly over his shoulder, the youngster said, "Those damn, dirty friends of yours set you up again. What do you say we end this the safest way possible?" Ogawa nodded but did not speak. Nurta gave a nod as well and lifted his hands, allowing the Rasengans to fade into obscurity. Nurta called into the hall. "All right. We give up." 5 dozen gunner droids appeared in the chambers in a matter of seconds, and there were more lined the streets. Since they were machines, they were unable to feel anything, but if they could, they would all be ecstatic with the mission's accomplishment. Everything went wrong as the troop was escorting Ogawa into a ship and Nurta somewhere else. "Tajua Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, mass shadow clone technique." Ogawa exploded into smoke, exposing nothing but empty space, and Nurta crossed in his hands in a cross shape before yelling. Almost 1,000 blond young men quickly crowded Mos Eisley's streets as they went to work and confronted the machines. Nurdu, the original, was in the midst of the conflict. He ran up to a combat droid and smashed it to bits with a single punch before spinning around backwards, narrowly having his face burned by plasma. Instead, his hair was singed as he crouched low and kicked the next machine in half. As the cool night sky started to snatch the suns of the day, the sounds of pulse rifles reverberated ferociously through the streets. The vacant area where Nurta fought was torn apart by red bars of light, and numerous clones and machines were converted to nothingness that either burst into smoke or littered the grounds. Within orbit, the Hutts and Mandalorian who were watching could hear the man in the dark cloak gritting his teeth. The man's voice unnerved the Hutts once more as he said, "He's certainly a persistent little bug, isn't he?" Jabba silently pondered if he hadn't struck a horrible bargain in this quest. Gardulla wasn't so quiet and expressed his ideas out loud. "Translate to Hut, why haven't your droids killed them yet? If you fail in this venture, I will claim every ship under you command as payment." Just before the Hutt's strangled breathing sounds could be heard, the cloaked man's head swung toward Gardulla and he raised a menacing fist. After threatening, "Don't presume to know anything, Hutt," he turned to a communications panel and released the huge mass. With a rapid touch of a few keys, the face of a Zabrak devil appeared in front of everyone in the room. As he waited for orders, he said, "Master, you call on me?" in a questionable yet declarative manner. The cloaked man went to Jabba and said, "I need you to rid me of a problem on the surface." He saw that the Hutt slave girl had a thoughtful expression on her face, as though she was concerned about the young guy fighting the unstoppable army of machines on the surface. The man sensed the love connections between the two by reaching into the force. Take this woman with you and use her as need be, he ordered the Zabrak, grabbing the Twi'lek girl by the arm and throwing her to the ground. Jabba began to object, but restrained himself. Getting another Twi'lek was far simpler than replacing his own life. On the surface, with the added benefit of pure red chakra, Nuda held his right arm while an orange-sized hole repaired. Shadow clone Kanai! He exclaimed as the Kanai each made a dozen of themselves, skewering the squad and rendering them incapable of fighting. The young man soon returned to the battle, his long blonde hair flowing behind him as he threw Kanai at a group of machines before flashing his hands through seals. A ship landed right in the middle of the battlefield as the number of machines was decreasing and Nuda's army of copies was being readily restored. Built to transport a crew of 5 to 10 individuals from the surface to orbit, the ship was compact and straightforward in its construction. Its shape was similar to a box, with gold plating adorning the external walls and a Republic crest on the ship's nose. As soon as the ship touched down, the rear door opened and 2 figures emerged. Nuda recognized the first as Kandai with ease. The second was concealed by a coat, yet he exuded a menacing sense of murderous purpose. Nuda tried to charge forward without thinking, but was struck in the stomach by a pulse weapon. Kandai! Let her go, you bastard! He yelled. As Nuda cradled his wounds, he fell to one knee, only to slide to the right due to another round of explosions. As his stomach mended, a number of clones stood watch over him. He said, "Thanks, QB." Instead, he could agree that mutual survival was a good thing, even though he and the demon inside were not exactly pals. The blonde was effectively dead, at least until the QB managed to get away. Pulling out a long silver stick, the man in the cloak tapped a button on it. "Kill yourself and I'll let this Twi'lek live, boy," was the command that came from behind the cloak. The guy in the cloak paused, then withdrew his cowl, revealing a crimson face set on a black head, with pure black eyes that ended in pinpricks of yellow, and a crown of horns sticking out from his skull. "Oni?" Nuda inquired, his expression betraying his perplexity. The ship's man lifted one eyebrow and lit one end of his pipe. Slowly, with an increasing sense of anxiety, the blade of crimson worked its way to full length. The Twi'lek screamed in agony as the Zabrak man pressed the plasma-based weapon on one of her tentacles. Nuda stood up fast, a palpable crimson aura erupting about him like flames licking the air, his ringed eyes suddenly replaced by red-slitted pupils on a purple scara. The hundreds of clones that were left collapsed to the ground, screamed in agony, and then burst. Halfway through his statement, Nuda changed his tone. "You touch one more inch of her and I'll tear you limb from limb," he said. The boy's canine teeth grew longer into fangs and his typically thin whiskers enlarged. He dug the fingernails into his own palms, extending them into sharp triangular claws. The blood from his palms was heated and eaten by the licking crimson flames that surrounded his body before it could reach the ground. The aura created a lovely tail behind the boy. The Zabrak's eyebrow went up. The guy pushed the blade deeper into the Twi'lek's tentacle, making her faint from the agony. "What are you, brat? Humans don't metamorphose, nor do they have tails," he demanded. Nuda swore, his teeth gripped so firmly that blood spurted from his jaws. "I warned you, asshole!" he cried. Council of Jedi. Tatooine turned to face Yoda, a small green man of a race that no longer existed. He murmured, "HM. A great disturbance, I sense." Before his eyes widened even further, he yelled, "Of this boy, the Force is afraid," to the Council as a whole. Every Force adept in the vicinity and across the galaxy turned toward the spot where the Force was attempting to withdraw. Some of the less experienced warriors wet themselves from the amount of kill intent that washed off the child. In orbit, Tatooine. The man in the cloak proclaimed, "What is this power? I must have it for myself." his entire body shaking at the sheer and unadulterated hatred emanating from the surface. "There's no way that my own student possesses such a magnificent aura." "Then who?" The residents went to the surface's screen as one, only to witness what many would have thought was impossible. At the surface, plasma fire engulfed Nuda's form as he stood in the middle of the droids, but it was deflected as it struck the young man's aura. As if he were an animal, Nuda suddenly sprang forward on all fours, his tails following him as he achieved speeds that even the robots couldn't match. In an instant, Nuda had moved from the center to directly in front of the Zabrak, encircling the Sith Lord's throat with a clawed hand. The spectators assumed Darth Maul's eyes had fallen out of their sockets because they enlarged so much. As Nuda held him hanging in midair, Maul struggled, his voice as loud as a whisper. "How?" The blonde reared back and punched the Zabrak hard enough to rock the ship they were standing on, and Nuda's aura resembled that of a fox sitting on its haunches with its ears flattened. Nuda slammed his fist into the Zabrak with each yell. "How dare you! She's never done nothing to no one! And you killed her!" His eyes were watering, but they quickly dried up as he glared bloody murder. Darth Maul's instincts were strong, telling him to escape. The farther he could run. Until the boy left, hide somewhere. The Zabrak heeded those instincts for the first time since childhood. Raising his hand and calling his staff to himself, Maul used all of his strength to cut off his arm, holding him in midair, and fled for his life. Nuda screamed once again as his chakra solidified to become a new limb, and he yelled in pain as his limb dropped to the ground. "Damn you! Get back here!" he roared, struggling to stand up. Down the street, the Zabrak hid behind a building and tried to hide his presence as much as possible. The Zabrak was alone in his own breathing, and he could hear his heart pounding faster and louder in his ears like a drum. Every little sound was sufficient to trigger his warning sirens. Darth Maul was in a ready stance, both ends of his twin lightsaber burning an angry red, when a sheet of paper was pushed by a slight gust of wind and rustled. However, all he heard was empty nothingness. He was just relaxing when the wall behind him, his only source of security, was totally destroyed. A massive hand composed of pure red chakra tore through the wall, seized the Sith Lord's body, and then slammed him into the earth, pulling him with it. During the course of a quarter mile, the Zabrak's rear end was torn open. He was thrown into and through a bar after the arm changed course and lifted him into the air. He briefly caught sight of a drummer and a few customers before disappearing through the opposite wall. He used a force push to reduce his speed and righted himself mid-flight, backflipping to land on his feet and sliding another 20 feet back over the gravel and sand road. "Enough!" Darth Maul cried, willing the force to flow through him once more. With both lightsabers blazing, Darth Maul charged at the most pure manifestation of evil and hatred he had ever experienced, striking hard with his blade in an attempt to cut off the red limb, only to have the substance, whatever it was, flow around his blade as if it were non-existent. With only a millimeter separating the two bodies, Maul used the force to push the chakra back and hold the hand away from himself. Though the boy lacked skills, the sheer force of the blows, his healing rate, even from a lightsaber, and the menacing red chakra all added up and were starting to overwhelm Darth Maul. In an instant, Nuda was within sight, kicking, punching, and biting at Darth Maul in an acrobatic display of a berserker's rage. Darth Maul was immediately on the defensive, using the force to keep himself alive. Darth Maul used all of the strength he could gather in a single instant to propel himself into the air with a huge leap, landing on top of what may have been a building but was now just a pile of crushed debris. "My lord, I would really appreciate some help." The wanton destruction on the surface was causing the huts to tremble and tumble over each other up on the ship. "Send more droids," Gardella exclaimed, forgetting that huts does not now use basic. Jango was already getting ready when Jabba turned to face his Mandalorian bounty hunter. Jabba, I'm expecting some hefty compensation for this one. As he made his way to the drop tube, he called over his microphone. A couple nice planets and a few dozen ships should suffice. In other places. Even without feeling for a heartbeat, Conan could see the rise and fall of the woman's large bosom as he crouched down beside the comatose Twi'lek's body and shook her head. Really, child? Did you fail to notice that these enormous tits were still moving? Speaking more to herself than everyone else, she reprimanded. Alongside Darth Maul and Naruto. As Jango Fett descended on booster power, Darth Maul used another force push to push the insane man off the building's roof for the 10th time. I heard you could use a hand, Zabrak. Jango's voice was plainly reflected onto Darth Maul's position. Don't be concerned about hurting him. Kill the brat, please. Maul yelled at the Mandalorian. I can take his head if you can get him lined up and immobile. Darth Maul laughed evilly and slipped from behind, slicing cleanly across Naruto's neck while Jango shrugged and turned his shoulder cannons toward Naruto, firing round after round, forcing the young man back one step at a time. The boy's head hit the floor with a horrible thud, and his blonde hair was cut in half at the base. Even when Naruto's body collapsed next to him, rage kept twisting and distorting his face, causing the chakra to gradually bleed away until nothing remained. Jango fired at the corpse with his cannons until all the remnants were gone, except for a head that stared at him angrily until the mouth froze and the eyes went glassy. The Mandalorian lifted the head to the sky and showed it to the ship above, saying, Well, this'll be a nice trophy to have. Unbeknownst to everyone, when Naruto's head was dying, strands of red chakra escaped and coagulated in the desert, where a particular red fox was waiting to regain its full vigor. A young man was standing there, staring at the scene in front of him, and the best word to describe it was carnage. He could see pieces of human flesh, body parts, and large pools of coagulated blood everywhere he looked. Not a single large or undamaged body part was large enough to identify what had been killed and slaughtered here. The young man was 6 feet 2 inches tall, with a somewhat aristocratic air about him. His eyes were almost entirely white, but if one looked closely, they might see a faint hint of lavender irises. He was wearing a brand new set of white clothes, a pair of fully covering pants, a top that was folded one side over the other with the lapels extending down the front and back, several straps of white belts that held the garment closed, and a strange blue headband with a metal plate that featured a leaf with a spiral design in the middle. His long, black hair falls to the end of his back, and the headband prevents it from revealing his face. Like a specific individual from his past, the young guy leaned down and gathered some of the blood into his hands. I vow that I will find you, he said softly as he allowed the bloody dirt to fall back to the ground. As he reached his full height, the sounds of flames licking the air reverberated in the background, quickly revealing that the young man is not alone. Behind him are 3 other people, each of whom makes the crew appear like a group of misfits. The first is a young woman with wild flowing red hair, fair skin that is pockmarked with bite scars, eyes that are the brightest shade of red, and a pair of square glasses. She doesn't wear a headband, but her belt buckle bears a plate depicting a black crow with wings spread wide as it devours a snake. Her black shorts were almost non-existent, as if the girl had cut them just where her legs started and her buttocks ended, and her top was just a sports bra and not much else. Her large D-cup breast pressed defiantly against the clothing, jutting her nipples for the world to see as she looked back and forth. The next was a young man, a full year younger than the first, with coal-black eyes and a face that reflected a lack of interest as though the entire mission, in fact, the mission itself, were beneath him, but for some strange reason he had come back to the village just to be assigned to this mission. The man wore the traditional samurai's attire, from the tight boxer-like shorts to the open hakama, even strapping a short, straight sword, known as a chikudo, to his back. His hair was black and spiked in a variety of frustrating ways, almost as though it would not be tamed. The last member of the team was a mystery. He wore a long flowing black cloak that concealed everything about him, a white face mask with no distinguishing features, and no plate to indicate his origins. If it had not been ordered by the current headmaster, none of the other members would have accepted him or her. "I apologize, sir, but is there any chance you might finish this up soon?" The white-masked person's gentle plea came next. The ninja's voice was as smooth as silk, but it had a slight edge that made it hard to tell what gender it was. The cloaked ninja was suddenly very next to the samurai-clad ninja, his sword drawn and the blade lightly placed against the ninja's neck. "Why don't you take off your mask?" the young man asked. "I'd like to see what you look like underneath it." Which made the redhead squeal and send hearts floating around her head. "Nudafrenkuen is so great." The samurai gave her a tick mark for cheering. The mask-wearing ninja pushed the blade away from its neck and shrugged its shoulders, saying, "I could take off my mask, but what fun would that be?" the ninja inquired, laughing heartily at the genderless warrior's body language. Hyuga Niji, the team leader, turned to his teammates and said, "That's enough, nerdy friend. We had a purpose when we arrived here. Or have you forgotten why you initially returned to Hyde Ninja Village?" Niji glared down at the Uchiho and reprimanded them. "I warned you, Shiro, the next time I draw my sword it will taste blood." Nerdufriend smirked and took his sword from the ninja before twirling it and slipping it into the sheath. He then moved away from the ninja, ignoring Shiro's shivering. There was something familiar about that ninja, something in the traits that made Nerdufriend feel as though he was being had. "As I was saying before, Niji Taishu," the genderless ninja began, "when can we get this mission started?" Shiro turned a blank mask to Niji and nodded slightly. With a neutral expression on his face, Niji turned to the redhead and said, "Karen, can you sense anything? The chakra of the Kyubi? The chakra of Nurdu? Anything?" he questioned the censor. As soon as Karen closed her eyes and expanded her awareness, she was attacked by a number of foul odors, some of which were almost as strong as the auras of Orochimaru and her Nurdu companion. "No, not Nurdu's chakra. However, I have a pretty weird feeling about this house. Several hundred people are moving. Items. It's incredibly difficult to describe." The ninja in the white mask began to set up trap seals in the immediate area while they talked about the present scenario, and Niji arched an eyebrow as his Nurdu friend leaned over him, his fingers itching as he caressed the hilt of his chikuto. "Is there anything? Such as? Individuals or something else?" Niji inquired, his bewilderment evident in his tone. With her flaming red hair flying in all directions, Karen shook her head and said, "No, it's nothing living. They are much larger and slower, and there are a lot more of them. It's like when you feel a kunai flying at you," she said. Niji put his palm to his chin in contemplation, but before he could open his mouth, a voice yelled, "Set down your weapons and give up right away!" From right behind the seasoned ninja came a voice. It was bipedal, stood upright, and had 2 arms, but it was thin. It was completely too thin to possibly have the strength to pick up a weapon, and its head was cylindrical and small enough to hold it in his hand. Niji rounded quickly, jumping up and down several paces as he dodged bolts of red-hot plasma, and soon he was alone as his Nurdu friend, Karen, and Shiro took to the high ground, evaluating the danger. "Who are you? And why should I give up?" he questioned the droid. "I am a combat service droid, identity number CSD42459, and you and everyone on this planet are subject to the embargo by the Trade Federation," the gold thing said, staring at the ninja for a few moments while it attempted to calculate the questions. "Termination will occur immediately if noncompliance occurs." "I kinda figured you were gonna kill me no matter what I did," Niji said, nodding his head. "Cuff 'em, boys," the machine said, turning to the tree lane behind it to let 40 more machines enter the space. "We're taking him back to the capital." Niji wanted to see where the capital was, so he made a hand signal to his teammates to let this scenario unfold. Maybe this would help him find hints about Nerda's whereabouts. In other places, it was as if the boy were still alive, and every time Jango Fett looked into those cold, dead eyes, he could imagine the boy's eyes changing to those monstrous red, slitted eyes instead. He would never admit it to anyone, especially the Hutts, but he'd been having vicious nightmares since defeating the boy. Jango Fett took off his helmet as he sat in his bed and stared at the severed head of his favorite victories, only to pause and glare at the cerulean eyes that glared hate-filled daggers at him. The Mandalorian sighed, got out of bed, and walked briskly across the room till he came to the youngster, and swung the jar with the preserved head toward the wall. Jango sighed, pressed a few buttons on his suit, switched it off, and started removing the armor. The bounty hunter finally plucked up the confidence to take another look at the head when he was down to his last piece of armor, only to be relieved to see that it was still turned away from him. Perhaps I should give you away to Jabba? In an attempt to shake off the nightmares, he pondered out loud. The Mandalorian did not see Nerda's eyes transform from lifeless blue to purple scale with silver iris and 6 purple rings as he put his head to sleep. They flickered around the wall for a few seconds before reverting to their usual dull, lifeless orbs. The Tatooine. She wasn't really sure who it was or where they were from, but Shmi whirled around just in time to see the faintest of flashes from the corner of her eye. Someone was moving about her quarters, just out of sight. Who's that? Present yourself, Shmi asked, holding a kunai tightly behind her back. Although she was not an experienced or well-trained shinobi, Shmi had been schooled to be at least as good as a genin graduate. Shmi was immersed in a true tornado of white sheets as the sounds of ruffling papers filled the air. The sheets moved quickly to engulf her, catching hold of her neck and body before exerting pressure and squeezing. As her arms were securely bound behind her, and she felt the throwing knife's blade fall freely to the ground, Shmi began to panic. An upper body began to form over her head as Conan solidified and bent at her waist to give the former slave a passionate kiss, to which Shmi moaned but gave in, returning the kiss with equal fervor. The paper peeled away from the imprisoned woman to form the former Akatsuki member's legs after Conan released her lips' grasp on Shmi after an eternity. I have missed you, my love! I hope you received my correspondence throughout our trip. With a slight smile on her face, Conan inquired. Shmi blushed and smiled simultaneously, realizing how strange her relationship with the two ninja was. At the moment, she had 2 sons, the first of whom was born to the traveling desert priest before he left, but all of them, Conan, Nerdu, and even Shmi herself, seemed to have forgotten the man. As a result, Anakin, the older of the two, was regarded as a virgin birth, given to her by the Force itself. Her second son, on the other hand, was equally miraculous. Through some weird ninja trickery, Conan had used a jutsu to make herself male for one night, impregnated the young woman soon after Anakin was born, and thus her second son, named after Nerda's father. Regarding the boys, Anakin, Nerda's father, decided to use that opportunity to barge into the room and hurl Conan over with exuberant cries. Ka-san! Conan laughed merrily as she gazed at the 2 boys, one with dusty blonde hair and the other with blonde hair as golden as the early light of the day. The 2 decreed as one as they pinned her to the ground. All right, guys. Have you behaved well with your mother? She inquired, and the 2 shook their heads and smiled guiltily, but Conan couldn't contain the emotions on their faces and started laughing. So, where is Nerda now, and when will he return? With interest in her voice, Shmi inquired. I traveled for 3 days to get home to you, and all I get is a question about Nerda's whereabouts, Conan said in a gloomy voice, holding at her heart and wearing a painful expression as she pushed the boys off of her and sat up as the 2 fled. You know, a girl has feelings too, as she collapsed to the ground in a dramatic faint, covering her face with her forearm, she teased. Oh dear me, Shmi said, laughing and jumping to the ground before resting on top of M's chest and softly kissing her still visible lips. No offense intended, milady. There must be something I can do to make up for this offense, right? With a seductive wiggling of her eyebrows, she inquired, and Conan's expression contorted in a way that was entirely predatory. At this point, Conan's intercom started flashing and beeping.